All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sorry for the delay. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's talk, which is the sixth and final in the City of Hudson series of speaker events organized by the Office of Mayor Kamal Johnson to center Indigenous voices, stories, and issues throughout Native American Heritage Month. My name is Michael Hoffman. I am the mayoral aide and ADA coordinator for the City of Hudson, and over the past few months, I've had the pleasure of working with the city's first Indigenous consultant, Heather Brugel, on creating this incredible and important series of events. Heather would be making this introduction tonight, but unfortunately, she has come down with COVID and will be focusing on recovering, so we sent her all the healing energy tonight and hope for a continued smooth recovery. Tonight, I am honored to welcome Dr. Joe Stahlman to this virtual space to speak with us about current issues in Indian Country. Dr. Stahlman is a scholar, researcher, and director of the Seneca Nation's Seneca-Iroquois National Museum and is of Tuscarora descent. He has over 20 years of research experience working with First Peoples. His research focuses on culture and history, as well as ongoing socio-economic and health and wellness related endeavors with Native communities. He takes an active role in addressing the space Native peoples occupy in North American archaeology and cultural resource management. He regularly talks on the need to promote equity, equality, and justice among all peoples in North American society through a number of reconciliatory processes which are inclusive for all and empowers people to express agency through creative and intellectual endeavors. Before I turn it over to Dr. Stahlman, I do just want to respectfully remind everyone to remain on mute for the duration of tonight's talk. We'll have an opportunity following Dr. Stahlman's talk for questions, and feel free to use the chat function tonight to submit questions throughout our time together. And with that, I give the floor to you, Dr. Stahlman. Thanks again so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Michael. And I want to thank Heather for inviting me, and I would like to thank the City of Hudson for putting on this important event. It really does show a step forward, more steps that we need to see around our state and country and world. So I do appreciate the invitation. Once again, thank you. My name is Dr. Joe Stahlman. I am the director of the Onöhsagwë Cultural Center for the Seneca Nation of Indians. That's their official name. When they speak amongst themselves, they call themselves the Onondaga. That's the preferred name. Just like with any indigenous communities, there's several names. For this particular community of Seneca folk, they're located in southern New York in the southern tier along the Allegheny. That's where our museum is. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get started with my PowerPoint, and I'll kind of move into my presentation more. So give me a moment. So Seneca Nation, I have loved working for Seneca Nation. They have a reach that is amazing. A lot of people know about our museum and the community in general, and just working with that partnership with the nation, it's just been a phenomenal job. Forgive me, I haven't used Zoom in a couple months, and I forgot where the share button was.
So it should be on the bottom of your screen.
I know.
Yeah.
Forgive me, everyone.
No worries.
As I bumbled through Zoom again, since it's been a really busy year for the museum and for TIPO. So I haven't been in front of a computer a lot this season. And it's only been recently that I had to come back in because of the cold. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see your presentation. You are currently, we're not in presentation mode though.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. I think it was just taking time or something. So once again, I work for the Seneca Nation. Their logo is to the left, and then I work for them. I am the director of the Onöhsagwë Cultural Center. Onöhsagwë means the door is open, and I think it's fitting for our job, for what we do. So historically, at the time of Europeans arriving in this part of the world, the Seneca people were mostly they considered their homelands to be the area of land straddling the Genesee River in the east and the Great Lakes in the west. And that's kind of been their core homeland at the time of Europeans. However, over time, those boundaries have shifted quite dramatically in this region and even beyond the scope of the maps here. And so the map on the left kind of shows that Seneca homeland, and then you see the first 11 territories that were reserved for them based on some treaties. And those are the hatch areas. However, over time, those boundaries also changed. And if we look at the map on the right, you kind of see how the nation is now. You see the purple, you see the Allegheny Territory. That's where the museum is located. And then up to the north of that, we have the Cattaraugus Territory. And to the immediate east, kind of making a triangle between those two territories, we have Oil Spring. So those were the three original territories that the Seneca Nation held on to after they sold off these other territories. However, over time, they have been able to buy land and bring it back into the nation's land base. And so this map also includes Buffalo Creek, which has another 10 acres that the nation has bought. And then the Seneca Niagara Casino property is 50 acres, and that has come back into nation hands as well. And so right in the middle of Niagara Falls, New York is sovereign territory. And a lot of people don't realize it. There's 50 acres of sovereign territory in the middle in the city of Niagara Falls. I think it's quite amazing. I think that is a good step in the right direction. So I know that with today's talk, I am talking about current events in Indian country, and I will. However, I do want to give a little bit of a background to the Seneca people, to the Seneca Nation, and to a little bit of the history of New York State. To me, in order for me to do my job, it becomes really important to have these nuggets of knowledge at hand, because it really does help in making certain types of arguments that I do in my jobs. And so the Seneca Nation came into being. They split with the other Seneca community in 1848, and this came about because the communities just kept losing land, and so people had to make some hard decisions, and there was a faction of people who broke away from the more traditional community, and they created their own community, and that's the Seneca today. They have an elected government, so they have three branches of government. They have executive, legislative, and judicial. They keep clan mothers for naming, genealogy, and other cultural endeavors, whereas the Tonawanda Seneca, who remain with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, they embrace more of a chief and clan mother system. Currently, Seneca Nation has about 8,500 folks. And then what I like to point out in my talks is they're one of the largest employers in Western New York, and a lot of people don't realize it. And they really do have an impact on our economies and our lifestyles here. And I just want people to know that more often. So I work for Onöhsagwë, which is a cultural center now. So this is an ideological shift from the nation. So in 1977, the nation started their museum, and it was a tiny building. The building still exists. It's on Broad Street, and it was a simple 80 by 80 square foot, 80 by 80 square foot building. Not very big, really not very big. And all of their collections kept growing over time, and they had to use every offsite facility that they could find to store everything. And then there was also a community grassroots movement for arts, for museums, for libraries, for continuing these art forms as well. And so just over time, there's just been this need growing in the community for a larger collection space, and it took some time. However, in 2018, Seneca Nation opened up this fantastic building right here that we have on the screen. It's 32,000 square feet. There's technically 3 stories to this building. The very top, that little slopey area, that's where all the HVAC is kept. On the ground floor, we have the museum and a gift shop, and in the basement, we have collections and offices for 3 other departments. We have named We have named Onöhsagwë after Richard Johnny John. Gwende, that was his longhouse name. And so everyone just call him Gwende, and his name really means the doors are open. And the nation decided to name the facility after him because he was one of these people who kept culture alive during those lulls where culture started to kind of disappear, kind of go away. Or sometimes the community would use other symbols from other communities to highlight their indigenousness to the world when they had, they wanted the public to know about something. And so as a result, that Seneca identity kind of kept rolling through time with these ups and downs. But it was someone like Richard Johnny John who kept it going during those lulls. And so as a result, we decided to name the community building after him. And I think it's quite fitting. Okay, so I'm just going to be quick here so I can jump to other things. So within this giant building, this 32,000 square foot building, we have the museum upstairs. We have a gift shop there. We have a classroom. We have a MakerBot lab that makes 3D models. And then downstairs, we have archives, TIPO, we have a collection space that is 11,000 square feet. And then this past February, Seneca Nation opened up a visitors enterprise office where we work on tourism-based initiatives now. And so this area that Seneca Nation has always wanted is there, and it's really flowering. It's really quite amazing. You know, when you go through something like COVID, you kind of wonder what the future is going to be like. And just seeing the life of the cultural center shift since 2020 is quite amazing. In the museum, we do your typical stuff, tours, special events. We have the store. We open up exhibits regularly. We try to focus on Seneca people, Seneca history, Seneca events. But we are definitely open to other Haudenosaunee exhibits, art styles, representations. And then in the archives, it is a small department of 2 people, and those 2 people control the institutional memory of 70 departments. Seneca Nation has 70 departments now. And I regularly work with probably about 10 or 15 of them. So it's quite the government. This other office, Tribal Historic Preservation, this is my other job. So I split the museum or the cultural center down half. I do the museum half time and I do historic preservation half time. I really love historic preservation. So historic preservation is just like any other historic preservation office. All the 50 states have one. There's about 200 native nations that have historic preservation offices, and Seneca Nation is one of those few in New York State that have one. I think there's only 2 in the state right now, maybe 3, not very many. And so within that job, I get to put on my scholar cap a little bit more, and I get to talk about the need for ensuring that Seneca interests are maintained in off-territory sites. I help educate folks on territory about places, about locations, about what we would call archaeology off territory. I educate folks on that. So if they're going to be working with any of their properties or doing any kind of development, we can be right there to make sure that we preserve and conserve culture as we encounter it. And in the areas where the Seneca folks continue to reside, they are, over time, they have been heavily populated and they continue to be. And so finding sites are always is quite common. And then the last thing I would like to point out, that one little area on the maps earlier, Oil Spring, that is going to be one of my focus areas for 2023. I want to develop that area more. I think it's very important to Seneca and Haudenosaunee history. And I think more people need to know about this special little spot. And so that's where I'm kind of focusing my office for the next calendar year. So TIPO, you saw the little territories for Seneca Nation, right? So on this map, if you look at the purple areas, those are the areas of interest to Seneca Nation. And so my TIPO position covers all of those areas in purple. And so not only do I work with New York State, I work with Pennsylvania, I work with West Virginia, Maryland, Virginia, and Ohio. And so Seneca's interest over time has really changed. However, we still maintain an interest because there's cultural sites, there's cemeteries, unmarked cemeteries mostly, that exist in all of these areas, and development is always going on. And so we're always trying to keep one step ahead of what's going on out there so we can ensure that we don't disturb any of these locations. I try to do my best. I don't know if I get them all, but I try. But it's quite the area. And then in our collections, so conservation and preservation of Seneca heritage for current and future Seneca Nation members. That's the mission of the collections. It has its own mission. And so in 2021, Dexter, the TV series, rebooted, and they focused on Seneca peoples. And as part of their outreach, they asked us if we would like $100,000, and they asked what we would do with it. And I said, I would love to digitize over 100 years of Seneca video, language recordings, anything that you can think of, we have in our collection space. We have everything from Super 8s to 8mm to newscast footage to VHS. Seriously, we have it all. And so I really would like to start digitizing all of this material. So that's one of the areas of focus. And then within our cataloging system of the collections, we're going to indigenize it and set it up in ways that is very meaningful for the community and how they access those materials. This is the Visitor Economy Management Office. I'm going to keep moving. I could be here all night talking about the job I love. So they basically do tourism type stuff. I really enjoyed my partnership with Courtney. She runs this department, and I'm really excited to see what they do. Another thing that we do is repatriation. And so since this structure has been made, it has changed the way that the world sees the Seneca people. So in the past, it was based on my knowledge of the old museum and how things were done. It wasn't always in a way that the people, outsiders, reached out to the communities. But because this building is now there and it has such a public focus, people are calling the nation now for repatriation. I have people calling saying, my grandfather was an avocational archaeologist. He dug up this site in this county on this road, and I can look it up and I can say, oh, that's a Seneca site. What are you hoping to do with this? And most of the time they're saying, we're calling you because we want to return everything. We're sorry that Grandpa had this, but he was a collector. And when he passed, we thought it was time to send it back. And this happens a lot. Over the last 2 weeks, I have had 4 packages arrive through the mail. And 2 of those packages were brief prior conversations, and 2 of them I had no prior conversation with the folks. They are just sending things at this point. And that's one of the reasons why I accepted Heather's invitation when she reached out to me, because one of the changes that I see in Indian Country, I see it, that title is a slight lie, right? Because when I say current events in Indian Country, what I'm really doing is glossing over some of the things that my office sees on a national level and how it's more regional in my life at Seneca Nation. So I could have probably rewrote that title a little bit different, but the things that are happening with this office are the things that I think are happening in Indian country based on the conversations and the larger meetings that I attend regularly in person or on some kind of a streaming service. And so with repatriation, as much as I love it and as much as I think it needs to happen, I think in the last 2 years since Biden has taken office, I think there's been an explosion of agencies, an explosion of federal officers, a variety of departments on the federal level, working your way all the way down to the common person, reaching out to the nation saying, here, we have all of this material and we want to give it back. And we're not ready for it. It's overwhelming. It is so overwhelming. And as much as people want good things, people want to do good things, and I get that and I love that, but people don't understand that in a lot of these offices, so in this country alone, I said there's about 200 TIPO offices. How many recognized nations are there right now? Probably 2/3 more than that number. And that means there's over 200 more federally recognized nations in this country that don't have a TIPO office. And that means they don't have the funding to have someone like me in a position that's able to deal with what's coming in. So at this point, I have things coming in anonymously through the mail, email, and phone calls. And not only on top of that, Biden's government has also pushed forward some requirements for museums to consolidate a lot of their NAGPRA related collections. And so in the last year, our offices have been inundated with all of these online meetings where we have to go in mass to different universities and repositories and kind of sit there and listen to them go through their catalogs of materials that they have. And right now, one of the best ways to do it is to go by state and then break it down by county and then break the counties down even more. And it's a little bit overwhelming. You can spend hours on a computer and not actually get any work done because you're going through all of these lists with all of these different tribal partners with these institutions that have been holding on to the materials for a long time. And so in my career, Michael, when you read my bio, it said 20 years. I need to update my bio. It's 26 years now. And I've been doing this for some time. And I have been to a lot of institutions across this country. And I have to tell you, the museums are just full of stuff. They really are. And a lot of it is focused on Indigenous peoples within the boundaries of the United States. And a lot of this stuff was taken without our request. We didn't ask anyone to take care of this stuff. We didn't ask anyone to dig up ancestors and study us as scientific specimens. We didn't ask to be studied. We didn't tell you we were going to be extinct. We did not tell you that you had to do a salvage operations and go to our communities and take all of our stuff and put them into your institutions. But now we're at a point now where people are coming with us with Excel sheets and saying, if you want this stuff, you got to do something about it. And we can't do anything about it because there's not enough of us. And not only is there not enough of us, people realize that Indigenous communities like the ones that I work for here, these folks have a lot of things on their plates and they're thinking about other things besides culture. I wish we lived in a life where we could sit around and talk about the beautiful things that people do with their bodies and with their talents. But unfortunately, Indigenous communities in this country are still tackling a lot of basic things that people take for granted. And so sometimes things like protecting a photograph of a soldier or finding the next Seneca artist so you can help sell their materials out of your store, that becomes kind of secondary sometimes, right? And it becomes not as important as the museums and archaeologists and anthropology departments think, when in fact they really are, but our hands are tied and we have to make decisions. And so a lot of these communities are deciding to focus on their living communities, because that's the most tangible, that's our future. And so as I go to these museums and I go see these collections and I go take a little bit of stuff home, I find myself wondering, I'm going to wonder out loud today, because I think institutions, repositories, and anyone else who are applying for NAGPRA monies, they should stop taking NAGPRA monies and give them to the nation so they can hire people to go do this work. I think museums, institutions, and repositories have made a lot of blood money off our ancestors over time. And why are they continuously being awarded this through monetary funding to deal with stuff that they should have dealt with for the last 100+ years? And now we're being tasked. It's, you know, Biden might be equalizing everything out there, but we're still tasked with the burden of bringing our ancestors home. And I think the United States should come forward and help out a little bit and give a revolving door of funding to the nations who want to engage in this for a little bit to bring some of their needed ancestral materials home. This is what I see in the world. I see myself outgunned, outnumbered by museums, well-intentioned repositories. There is a sea change going on. However, we need help. And I'm not here for like a pity party or anything. I'm coming here as an anthropologist who is making valid observations of what I see happening on this landscape. And in order for this to be successful, there has to be a little equity put into this. And you know what's even more confounding is in the last year and a half, when Trump was in office, the State Department started working on international repatriations. And so now they're bringing us into another conversation where we get to start talking to countries like Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria, all of those other countries that hold on to our materials, and begin that conversation again with them, when in fact the United States hasn't even returned our stuff yet that they hold on us. I think they're really putting the cart ahead of the horse here, and they haven't even dealt with their own things here at home. And they're just making my job a little bit more difficult. That's the one thing that I saw. So I know I'm a really talkative person, and I saw 2 hands up. You guys are welcome to ask those questions real quick before I go on.
That was just me clapping, Joe, and I think the same for Stephanie.
Oh. I thought there were like hands up. All right, so permit me for a minute. I have my notes. I shifted my notes and I can't see them. All right. Can you guys, are you guys seeing my share or no?
No, you took the share down.
Okay. You know, I don't have to keep it up because I'm running out of time, Michael. So I'm just going to talk, I think.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. So, you know, I went to a institution last week to pick up 3 ancestral objects. This was actually set into motion before COVID. So late 2019, early 2020, COVID happened, and then this particular repatriation got put on the back burner. And so late summer, that director reached out to me and said, "Hey, Joe, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Can we pick this back up?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we set up this whole trip where I was going to go to their institution. And it takes me a number of hours to drive there. And so I set up 3 days where I can spend one day driving out there, the second day in their facility to look at stuff, and then the third day to drive home. And so I get out there, and when I go meet them, no, a week before I go, they send me an Excel sheet, and the Excel sheet has all of these Seneca-related remains. And I can't simply drive there and take them home because they are using the NAGPRA process. I am unable just to claim anything NAGPRA. Plus, I wouldn't do that. I work with the Seneca community, so I make sure there's a conversation going on before anything is ever done. However, they send me the Excel sheets 1 week before I go travel out there. And so what they're doing is creating an artificial friendship with our institution to create this ongoing repatriation when in fact the relation is actually better served if they simply give us back what is actually needed and not operate on ego. Because what they're really looking for is some kind of press. They're looking for some kind of ongoing partnership with the institution or nation. And I think it's really slowing down the process. And I'm already overworked, like I said. And so, you know, they're really dragging out the process for me because now I got to keep talking to this particular institution when there's over 100 more that are wanting to talk to me too. And I could have taken care of all of our ancestors and all of this material in one fell swoop. And so they're not thinking strategically about this. The other thing that really upset me was in the emails, around the time they sent me the Excel sheet, they told me what they were serving me. They told me they were giving me bagels for breakfast. I don't eat bagels. And then upon my arrival, they said that for lunch, we're having pizza. And so, you know, what they don't understand is repatriation is a solemn event that is taken with care and sometimes tears. You know, I'm one of those folks who I don't break down so easy. However, I work with people who take this very emotionally. This is a very heavy thing, taking ancestors home, taking certain ceremonial objects home. And it's just not handing some museum artifacts to the people that they belong to. It's much deeper than that. And I felt really insulted that I had to take away my valuable time to go do this event because I look at it as a moment to create friendships and to repair past wrongs. I do not take it lightly. And when I get there, they tell me they're serving me bagels for breakfast and we're going to have pizza for lunch. And that's what they're doing with the NAGPRA money. And I think that's a little insulting to the nations. And I think it's insulting to the ancestors. And I think it's a disservice to the tax dollars that are being used. You know, I could go on with what I see going on in Indian country, but I've been talking for 40 minutes basically on this one point. And so, Michael, I need you to interject. Should I talk about a second point or should maybe we just go into some questions?
I think we have time for a second point if you want to shift gears and talk about other issues.
Okay, here's another one. So the other half of my job, I do museums. And so the museum is funded by the nation. But like I said, you know, the nation has other cares and interests and things that they're taking care of. And so we get a budget, but there's also an expectation that we raise money. And so as any other museum, we have to go through the same slim channels of funding, just like everyone else does. And it's going for funding on through the feds and through some of the state channels is very sad. People don't see us as competitive. They worry about our output. They worry about the deliverables, the output. And you know, at first I thought maybe we were writing bad grants. And then I started asking for the comments back on the grants that were being successful. And I started noticing that a lot of the people gauging our grants were people judging us, I believe, on comparing us with other museums. And so some of the critiques that I was seeing from folks were things like, there's only one person on staff who has ever worked in a professional museum setting. And so critiques like that, when you think about institutions of color or indigenous communities, you know, we don't have the same types of folks working in those institutions as professionals, professional institutions that are predominantly white institutions. Those are quite different institutions, and I don't think that we should be compared to them. Nor do I believe that we should be compared to the high standards that they have for that. You know, the one thing that I love about Seneca Nation, and some people see it as a negative, is the outside world that sees it as a negative, and that is this nation chooses to employ any person who wants to work. And if that person has an interest in museums or in culture, we try to steer that person into those interest areas. And so, you know what? I might have a person who was a butcher a few years ago, but now wants to be a museum curator. And guess what? We're going to give them a shot. However, it makes us non-competitive for those big grants out there. And I think that has to change. Because, you know, when I look at that giant, beautiful building, I just see potential for growth there. But it takes a lot of time to write a grant. We all know this, right? Anyone who's in any type of scholarship or profession, we're always out there hustling. And so it's not easy to sit down and individualize each grant to some project that you kind of think of on the spot, right? Like, here's this grant allocation. This is what they want people to do with it. What can we do? And so, you know, we do this a lot, and we have great ideas, and I know we're writing well, but we just can't compete with those outside institutions. And so currently I belong to a consortium of, they call it a BIPOC institution team, right? And it really is, but it's a term that I don't prefer. So it is a community of people of color institutions. We get together and we kind of talk about some of this. And right now, some of that conversation is talking about siloing us away from the institutions of predominantly white folk. And I don't think that's a good idea either. I think the best thing to do would probably change up the rules of the game a little bit to make it a little bit more equitable. Because I don't think any of us should be siloed. I think we should be visiting each other's communities. We should be exchanging ideas. We should be collaborating, and we should be visiting each other as friends and community members. And so we shouldn't silo. But I understand their point, though, because it's kind of rough out there. And man, you know, I'm really blessed to be working at the Seneca Nation, because I work with a lot of folks in this group, and they have been struggling for decades trying to keep their little museum or their big museum going. And I'm in admiration, but it's a lot of work. And I think there has to be a little change up here if this is going to succeed. So 45 minutes at this point, okay? So I'm going to stop now, Michael.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Dr. Stahlman. I do want to open it up for anyone online to raise their hand for questions or type your question in the chat. Looks like we have one from Kim Hill. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to start my video.
Did we lose her?
Kim, are you still with us?
I think she is. I think maybe she just clicked the wrong.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know where I cut off.
Okay.
So I think, sorry, what I was saying is like, I don't want to, like, because I know some of like the historic societies that we have at different like nations, especially Tuscarora, like they're very like small and reserved, but what advice would you have for someone that's working in an like state agency perspective, trying to have a more inclusive point of view without trying to be a burden on like nations and community members, but just trying to have the more truthful story coming across?
That's a great question. So I think what's initially that needs to be done is just create a friendship, right? So one of the most unlikely things that ever happened to me was I became friends with the director of the New York State Museum. And so prior to the repatriation of the corn planter tomahawk, I barely talked to Mark. However, going through the repatriation with him, we spawned a friendship. And that friendship has turned out to be a great thing between the two institutions because you know, I regularly go to them for a number of quick things because they're a great institution. They have a great repository, but they're coming to us a lot more. They're asking us a lot more questions. And so right now they're redesigning in a lot of their New York exhibitions. And, you know, they're asking us, what do you think about this? And it's not even necessarily relegated to Indigenous, but to New York State history. And so I'm looking at all of this content area and I'm able to make comments, critiques based on, well, you know, in this one particular thing, it disadvantaged this community, this Indigenous community. And so by doing, you know, by simply having a friendship with Mark, I'm able to have a voice in these matters and he's able to call me up and say, you know, this doesn't sound right. What do you think? Or Joe, Joe, we have this one author, he's submitted this thing, it says this, would you read it? And what do you think? And you know what? A lot of times people are also equitable with my time and they'll pay me for my time at a fair rate. And so it really does require some kind of a moment that allows you to become friends, but you can't force the friendship, right, Kim? And that was kind of my point earlier with this one institution that I went and visited. They want a friendship out of this, when in fact it was never really a just relationship anyways. And when in fact, when you know the nations have had a terrible track record with the New York State Museum, there's been some ebbs and flows of animosities over time. But you know what? If the right people in that institution can really change it, you know, change it for the better and put it on a path onto a future. And I think they've done that now. And it does change the relationships.
Yeah, that's part of like what I'm worried about for the position is like I know how much the state has done. And so just like coming from like a reservation itself, like I see all the problems and it's just how to be the right one to make it right back to the nation and the community members as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anything, you know, I always, you know, I'm just a representative, right? I don't have any power or anything. I come with what the nation is doing at that particular time for whatever I'm working on. And I simply relay that and they relay information back and I go back and work with my teams and go back and forth. It's a back and forth thing, you know. And it takes a while for non-native institutions to realize that process, but once they do, they really accept it and kind of appreciate it because that's where the checks and balances come from, right? You don't let someone just go run off with something and just do it. You have checks and balances. So I didn't catch the first part of what you were saying. You were on a mute the whole time. So can you go back to the first part?
Yeah, so I just started the interpreter of Native American history position for the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Sites.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, my job will be making sure the Indigenous voices and stories are being included with all the updated panels and historic sites that are happening. So a lot of it's going to be like trying to like reach out to like the nations and figure out what our historical societies have. But like you said, like there's not that many people that are doing that kind of work. And there's so much things like going on in their lives. It's like I have like the resource to be able to do the research, but it would be like the accessibility, but also like not being a burden to like be constantly just asking for more from someone who had things taken away.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, you're going to learn something, I think, in a few weeks about one of the holding institutions at New York. And there's going to be a giant conversation at some point in the near future. And it's going to be a very interesting one. I don't want to go into it here. It's the wrong place. But yeah, these conversations are always happening now, and they're great. But there has to be some realization that there's a certain capacity that the nations can handle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because of their economies at home. And with certain nations, you know, they're not taking the grants. They're not applying for that type of money because it violates some principles. And the outside world doesn't understand that, and they think it's an impoverishment, right? When in fact it's not. It's something else entirely. Yeah, I think we're kind of taking over here. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if anyone else has any other questions. Feel free to raise your hand, type in the chat. Stephanie?
Thank you so much, Mr. Stahlman, first of all, for your time and your labor. And you said at one point that you don't get very emotional, but it seems like having to constantly go over and over and over things is probably very exhausting. And so thank you for going there with us. And it just, and also I appreciate Ms. Hill speaking and hearing the perspective of, it seems like the whole system, all the rules, all the structure, everything from day one when Europeans got here is completely antithetical to the way that things were always done here. Like the way that Native folks were in community and related to each other and to land and to the sacredness of place and everything. Like everything was different, and that has never changed. And it seems like maybe the Biden administration looks different from the Trump administration, but the big picture is like there's still all these structures, these artificial structures, and all these rules and all these hoops to jump through. And I just it just seems so ridiculous. It seems very fake and very artificial and kind of like an obstacle course. And is there any way to like work around that? Because it just seems like so much energy is wasted on everybody's part.
It is. But museums are interesting places. They're really places of violence. And museums are filled with nice people too, like really nice people, right? Some of the nicest people you'll ever meet, they'll never hurt a fly. But the problem is they don't realize that they're fronting these institutions of blood and death. And I'm not trying to go heavy here, Stephanie, or anything, but that is a reality, right? All of these curio cabinets that became museums were started by rich men, adventurers, explorers, soldiers who went across to other lands, and they came back with trinkets and loot and whatever else they collected. And, over time they have grown, and through whatever reason they gave themselves, they made themselves important. And it is all artificial. It really is. But, culture is all artificial too. It's all made real by how we construct things in our minds and with each other. And so it is important to figure out a way to undo it real quick, because it is simply just pen to paper, right? All of these policies. And there's tons of museums out there that have all of these policies that can be changed in one meeting with your board and say, why are we keeping the gates so tight against these communities where we have taken their stuff? And, if you want to read a really good book, I suggest that you read Dan Hicks, The British Museum. It's one of the better books out there right now that really talks about how the museums were just another arm of the state going off into the world. It's really eye-opening, and it makes you kind of see what's going on here in the same eyes by allowing you to see it somewhere else. And it will allow you to be more critical of what you see here at home. But it does have to change. And it is emotional, and it is wearing me down, because I feel like I am making the same arguments over and over. And I do it with a smile too.
Thank you.
So I know you're across New York State, but your earring is like flashing me in the eye.
Sorry.
Like I tried to duck once.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from folks here? Jack, go right ahead.
Hi, I have to apologize because I was only able to get logged on part of the way through your conversation, but I appreciate you taking the time tonight to speak with us. And I asked this question sort of as a follow-up to the Q&A that you just had, and in full respect of what you said earlier about navigating grants and your time being respected. So I don't mean to propose this as new things that you ought to do, but really it is a question out of curiosity. Taking the premise that the museum is a colonial structure, and that even the idea of a museum, I think of a museum as a building that I go to attend and pay a fee and then go through the gift shop and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an indigenous tradition of museum that you would rather be practicing that is, honoring of past that you could practice through your structure that you're leading right now?
Well, yes. Everyone has, or all past peoples had, many peoples had a form of ancestor worship at some point. But, as times change, so do our expressions of how we do things. And so over time, we have come to accept the museum as one of those outlets. But even though it's a museum or a cultural center, it doesn't mean that it's not indigenous, though. Because in the representation of the Seneca-Iroquois National Museum, I think it's much different there than if you were to go to Ganonigan, which is a state museum, or even go to, let's say, the Field Museum or the New York State Museum and look at their indigenous galleries. You're going to get a much different perspective of people at the Seneca-Iroquois National Museum. But we're also stepping away from that word museum too, and that's why we're focusing in on cultural center. Because when you see that museum within the totality of that building, it's only one small aspect, and it doesn't really even feel like a museum. It's kind of an introduction. It's a gateway to the Seneca community and to the Haudenosaunee. It's one of the doors to Iroquois. And it gives people a lot of information if they choose to read everything. It takes a couple hours to get through it all. We got video and written text, ton of it. I don't know if I answered your question very well, Jack.
You did, yeah, thank you.
Started to feel like an advertisement for the museum.
Well, I definitely want to go visit. So you did your job.
Oh, so when I was talking, you remember that the slideshow? That's just my life at the museum in the last 4 years. Those are just like little visual highlights of some of my encounters there. It's been lovely.
Great, thank you. Any other questions tonight from folks? All right, well, I think then we can wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Dr. Stahlman, for joining us tonight. Really insightful and important discussion here. Any last words before we sign off?
No, I hope Heather gets better soon. It was nice to meet you, Michael. It's nice to meet everyone here. And I want to thank the city of Hudson for inviting me. Anyway.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.